All right, guys, what's going on? Welcome back to the Everything College Football Podcast. Today, me and Nick here, we're doing our 2025 preview and prediction for the Mississippi State Bulldogs. Jeff Lebby returns after a 2-10 debut season as head coach. He'll also be the OC. Matt Barnes, Coleman Hutzler will be splitting the defensive coordinator roles. Pretty good offseason, top 30 in high school and portal recruiting. And they went 7-5 against the spread, so this team played a lot better in most games than they were projected to do by the sports books, despite that 2-10 mark. Okay, I think starting with the offense, this is a group that returns 4 starters. You know, it was a pretty respectable season for them on offense, especially when Michael Van Buren was given the keys to the offense. Of course, he ends up transferring out, but they showed signs of life. You know, they scored 31 on Georgia, only lost to 10 to Texas A&M. They competed in the final 3 games more so on defense than offense. But I think second-year Jeff Lebby's system is certainly going to pay dividends, especially for Blake Shapen. This is a guy who started the first 4 games of the season, was on a nice little tear. 10 touchdowns, 1 pick, was completing almost 69% before getting hurt. In the past, he has shown great touch, makes pretty good decisions, has no issues throwing in the tight windows. A gritty player, though, at the end of the day. Good accuracy. He can really rip it with some precision. I think he's good on the run. You can make plays on the move, deliver a nice ball as well. Overall, this is a guy who is a gamer. He's done a good job adding size. He was, about 6'1", 210. I think he's bulked up a little bit more. Of course, he suffered that shoulder injury last season. He's played a quite bit amount of football up until this point, Nick. I think Shapen is a respectable starter. Van Buren would have been better, but this is not a bad consolation prize for 25.
Not a bad cancellation prize at all. I think Blake Shapen is a really good quarterback that they're going to continue to rock with here. He was playing good football before his injury. He's a veteran that's been around college football for a while. So this is a guy that's got good experience playing high-level football. I think he's more than capable in the SEC, especially for a bottom-tier team like Mississippi State. You read off the stats there. I was impressed, right? The 8 touchdowns and 1 pick passing was really good. He did 7.5% TD percentage ratio, which I think is really solid as well. About 1,000 yards passing last year. I would like to see Michael Van Buren return to this team. I thought he looked phenomenal for them, given the circumstances he was plugged into. I think Van Buren's a kid that's got so much high upside. He's going to be a guy you want to keep an eye out for in 2027 at LSU. I know it's far in the future, but I think he'll be a really good player for them in due time. I like Van Buren a lot, a very talented player. It's certainly a big loss for a program that's rebuilding under Jeff Lebby at Mississippi State. But I think Shapen's a solid bridge quarterback that will continue to hold this team over as they try to find their signal caller of the future.
Quarterback room is still pretty solid, too. Luke Kromenhoek was a pretty high-ranked recruit in his respective class last year. He got forced into action for FSU. He was pretty terrible, quite frankly, but the supporting cast was even worse for Florida State. So I think we just kind of put that behind him and give him a fair shot. They also picked up a top 10 quarterback recruit in Kamario Taylor. This guy is an elite athlete/runner. So if Shapen starts to struggle at some point, Nick, I think they won't hesitate to get one of these guys involved. I mean, again, this is a pretty good quarterback room, and the latter 2 are incredibly young and will likely be the future of this program. So I think there's a lot of experimentation that might go on at times this season.
Lebby's very good at building quarterbacks and working with quarterbacks. We've seen him work with some good quarterbacks in the past. I think Kromenhoek is still a player that's got a whole lot of talent in him, despite some of his deficiencies last year at Florida State. Was in a tough position. I think Kamario Taylor is a phenomenal player coming out of high school that is really the future for this team, in my opinion. Don't be surprised he gets reps this year.
Now you look at the run game, 35 attempts per contest resulted in 138 yards per game. But Jeff Lebby loves to run the football. They love to move with a lot of tempo. And I think this is a very good 1-2 punch at running back, Devon Booth. He's been a quality runner through 2 years. Great ball security. He had 4 touchdown receptions as well last season. Fluff Bothwell was a pretty coveted player in the portal. Maybe not that coveted since he ended up here at Mississippi State. 13 touchdowns, though, was really good as a gap scheme runner, especially on counter runs. Showcased good vision, really slipped through tight gaps well for South Alabama last year. Johnny Daniels had a few respectable outings as the backup running back. Xavier Gayton had a long rushing touchdown versus UMass. Had limited touches all year, but this is a pretty good room here. I'd say this is the strongest unit maybe on the entire football team, Nick, at running back. And that's great because Lebby loves to run the football.
I think this is the best unit on this team. I think this is a unit that's got some really talented players. Bothwell was a good add at South Alabama. He had some solid reps last year. Guyton showed some promise with that long rush against UMass, a guy that's got some big room and a big opportunity to grow. Devon Booth, I like what he can do, right? 750 yards rushing last year, 5 yards per attempt, 5 scores, about 60 yards per game. Also at 164 yards receiving and 4 touchdowns. In that regard, a really talented player that I think you can certainly rely on. A good number 1 back. He'll get a ton of touches here, and they'll see what they can do with that.
We look at the wide receiver room, a lot of transfers here out of the 12 that added on offense. 7 of them come at this position. Jordan Mosley's one of the lone returnees. He was the second leading receiver. Had way too many duds. Most of his production came across just a few games. He had 405 yards on the year. He had 200-plus yard games, both coming against UMass and Eastern Kentucky. And then he had 2 50-yard games as well. And that was pretty much it, Nick. So I don't know how much he's going to factor into this rotation this year, as there's a lot of competition breathing down his neck. Marcus Allen from Eastern Michigan is likely to take over that spot. 6'2", 212, was good and commanded lots of targets in the back half of the season. Aiden Williams was an ex-high-rated recruit, but didn't see much time over the last 2 years at Ole Miss. Brendan Thompson hasn't really did much in his career either, but is considered a speed guy. Anthony Evans, this is a pretty good talent from Georgia. Also brings a lot of speed to the table. Jerron Glover at times had some good spurts with Michigan State. He did struggle with drops and overall being able to stay on the field. Sadeh Troyer at tight end, pretty good pass catcher. Didn't exactly have a profound impact this past season. I think this is not a bad group collectively. No real standout. I think Marcus Allen can maybe be that guy you lean on the most if he can transition to this conference well. But I think it's going to be competitive, and I like the ability for Shapen to elevate this pass game. The best players do depart, and I don't really know if they upgraded by any means in the wide receiver group. What do you make of this group, Nick? Because I think it's respectable, but you do lose 2 of your top 3 guys in Coleman and Akarayo, and I think that certainly might hurt them.
It certainly will hurt them. I mean, they also lost Mario Craver, who was solid for them last year. I think Jordan Mosley's a solid player for them, but his production comes kind of skewed against some of those bad opponents. Like you said, 405 for him, 17.6, and 3 scores for him. Decent enough production, but he's got to step up and be a big guy for this team. Traore, the tight end, is a solid athlete as well, 361 yards receiving and 1 score for them this past year, 30.1 yards per game. Good numbers there. I think they added some decent players. I think Brendan Thompson was a solid add. He's a good player that you can get something out of. Previously at 2 SEC programs in Oklahoma and Texas, a guy that had 2 touchdowns last year at his previous stop. Aiden Williams, I think, is a solid add. Marcus Allen, I think you can get a lot out of him. Glover, I think, was a really good add as well. Allen, a guy that's bounced around a bunch of different places, but still I think has a lot of productivity left in his tank. Glover, as well as a guy that I think could potentially step up and be solid. He was at Michigan State last year and had 2 receiving touchdowns. Not a bad unit, certainly one of the weaker ones in the SEC, but I think a unit you can work with and build something out of in the future.
Look at the offensive line. Left tackle wasn't an abysmal position for them. They had 3 different players give up 4+ sacks each. And Albert Reese, he ended up playing right tackle as well. So, I mean, tackle positions were just abysmal for this team last year, especially left tackle. Jesse Ramildo has been quite good in his career. Started at St. Francis, transferred over from James Madison this past year, where he was very good. 6'4", 297. Needs to probably add a little bit more size, though. Luke Wark will be his competition, but he himself was horrid in his true freshman season in conference play. Jacoby Jackson returns at left guard. He was an average player, but at 6'6", 320, does have lots of experience. Center, we'll see a few transfers come in for that nod. Carson Lee played lots of snaps at all 3 interior O-line positions for Eastern Michigan last year. He's probably the favorite for the spot. I thought he was impressive for the Eagles. Kobe Keenum didn't play much, on the other hand, for Kentucky. Added Trevor Mayberry, who must have great football IQ as he started his career at Penn University, Nick, at left tackle. Played some left guard at Stanford after that, so this is a big brain guy. Missed all of 2024, though. Cannon Boone will be his top competition, being solid in his appearances last fall across the board. Looks like the aforementioned Albert Reese will be back at right tackle. Did struggle for the most part, but he's 6'7", 330 and has great versatility. I think the offensive line will improve. I know last year they dipped heavily into the portal to kind of reshape this unit, and they're still doing so. But I think these guys will be respectable, and I think it's hard to be as bad as they were last year up front. Nick, what's your take?
Yeah, certainly the floor has been met, and you can only really go up from here. I think, Keenum's not a bad ad from Kentucky, but certainly has a lot of improvements to do. Mayberry as well was a very fascinating ad, like you said, a guy that's been at some good programs in Penn and Stanford in terms of programs. As for schools, definitely going down a little bit in terms of academics at Mississippi State, but going up in terms of football at Mississippi State. Hard to clear Stanford and Penn, I know, but Mayberry is a decent player that could get some versatility out of him, maybe play right guard or left guard. Jacoby Jackson is a good returning piece for this offensive line. Jesse Ramal as well is a solid add from James Madison, who had some decent reps last year, a guy from upstate New York. So quite an interesting add for this team out of the portal as well. They're going to keep attacking the portal. Levy's going to try and continue to find guys in. Cannon Boone, I wouldn't be surprised if he gets a lot of reps this year as well, as a guy that got some reps last year. This is still a weak unit. They're still trying to put the pieces together. They'll get better this year, but how much better, that's yet to be determined.
Looking at the verdict for this offense, at some point Levy's unit will start to be something opponents struggle with weekly. but as of now, it's still a work in progress as he continues to search for the right combination of bodies. I really think this run game takes a nice step forward, while the receiving group has nice variety. Will be a unit to watch that will certainly progress in 2025. They averaged about 26 points per game last year, Nick. That's why a C plus might be a little too low. I think maybe B minus could be a potential area for them. I just think the offensive line is just too much of a question mark right now. And even though I'm confident in some of these guys they picked up at wide receiver, it's a possibility none of them really end up being much for them. Run game is phenomenal, though, and I think this unit will stun some people at times this year. B minus is probably where I'm leaning, but I'm going to stick with a C plus at the moment.
For me, a C plus makes a lot of sense. I do think they'll be able to improve the rushing attack. Last year, about 137 yards per game. I'm expecting a lot more this year. They'll certainly probably get the top 50 in that number in college football. This unit's got some solid pieces, but I still think they're a year or two away from being a complete unit. The offensive line has a ton of question marks for me, as is the wide receiver room being a complete makeover, and obviously losing Van Buren was a bit disappointing. Shapen, though, I still think can be a solid quarterback for this team. A lot of question marks here. They're heading, finally in the right direction. It feels like Levy's starting to put things together, but they're still probably a year or two away from being a competitive offense in the SEC fully.
Moving to the defensive side of the ball for the Bulldogs. This is a group that was abysmal last year, 118th in points per game allowed, almost dead last nationally against the run. They did have 12 players in the portal. They snagged the 5th-ranked linebacker from high school, and Tyler Lockard as well. So they're going to be looking to make some big improvements alongside 5 starters that are returning. Picked up a good defensive end from NC State and Red Hibbler. Only played in 4 games last year. Did have 7 sacks in 2023, though. Solid run defender at 6'2", 264. Rasheem Thomas spent 5 years at NIU. Was a quality run stopper in his last couple of seasons. 285-pound Deron Reed comes over from Auburn. Only saw a few snaps in his tenure, though. Deontay Anderson, one of the few returnees from a defensive end department. It was quite solid. He himself, that is, was quite solid in his extended reps. Interior D-line returns Kendrick Bingley Jones, 6'4", 310. He only played in 4 games, though. Kai McClendon had 30 tackles at 305 pounds in his true freshman season, so there's some promise there. Added Jamil Burrows, who hasn't played since 2022 with Miami. Will Whitson has been an outstanding run defender for Coastal Carolina in his career, so I think that's another one of those respectable additions. Travion Williams was below average, but saw plenty of reps. Jere Bledsoe didn't play much in 3 years at Texas, but of course that was an incredibly deep room. It had a lot of size and skill. Braden Jennings, best returning player across the D-line, I'd say, in that jack position. He led the team in tackles for loss. Added 3 transfers to help beef up that position, but the only notable one's probably Malik Seil from Texas A&M. He's got good effort. He's made some good efforts to improve his run defense. He should be a nice addition to the rotation. Only 10 sacks last year for this pass rush, Nick. I think that they will be better, but I don't think they're going to exactly double up their production. But I think across the board, this D-line will improve in all areas.
I think they will improve a little bit. Braden Jennings is a really good return at that jack position there. A very talented player, 56 total tackles, 5 tackles for loss, 1.5 sacks, 2 pass breakups, good numbers from him. A guy you can kind of rely on. Trayvon Williams was solid for this team as well in some of his reps, 33 total tackles, 2 tackles for loss, half a sack for him, while Kai McClendon as well had 30 total tackles, 2 tackles for loss, and a half a sack. Decent numbers there. I like some of these Red Hibbler, I think, is a guy that you can still get a lot out of. Will Winston was really good for Coastal Carolina, a player that you can put in the interior that could have some big impact early on. I think they got some solid recruits in the high school ranks as well. This is a unit that will certainly improve. I don't know if they'll do much better than that 10 sacks mark. Maybe they'll get to 12 or 15, but they're going to have to try to find some improvement here. This is definitely a unit that I'm a little bit higher on, though.
Looking in the middle of this defense, Nick Mitchell, he was the team's second top returning tackler. Wasn't all that great versus the run or in coverage, though. Zachary Tillman should see more time as he was quite consistent in those areas. And he did lead the team with 3.5 sacks, 3 of those coming across the last 2 games, so that's pretty impressive. Jalen Smith was a pretty good player for Tennessee at linebacker in his 200-plus snaps. He was an efficient tackler. He's also very good against the run. Darian Gillette, a 3-star from Texas, arrives after 1 quiet year with the Hornets. I think this is a pretty good room here. Once you factor in the true freshman Lockhart, Nick, I really like the additions of Smith and Gillette. I think they're going to be some underrated players here in the middle for them, on top of the return of Mitchell. I think this is a pretty solid group.
Yeah, I like Mitchell a lot here. This is a very talented player. 80 total tackles last year, 3 tackles for loss, a pick, and 2 pass breakups. Good numbers from this linebacker, a solid player. Zachary Tillman showed some success early on. 30 total tackles, 4 tackles for loss, 3.5 sacks, a pick, and 2 pass breakups. He's a player that you can rely on. Expect him to put some pressure on the quarterback as well. He's the guy that can get some QB hurries and get in the backfield and cause some problems. I think Gelati is a really solid ad as well, a guy that you can certainly get something out of. Jalen Smith is a really good ad who can be a productive player. Then Lockhart, they're high on him out of high school. A really big ad for this recruiting class that really bulked up that ranking there. This is a very good unit, probably the best on the team.
Now you look at the secondary, Isaac Smith. The most notable returnee was a great tackling safety. Didn't add much in coverage. Did play a good bit in the slot, though. Was a highly effective tackler. I think you're going to look to see him be a big focal point of the secondary. Hunter Washington, another returning safety, but he was abysmal for them. Will be pushed by JUCO add Tony Mitchell and Jerron Manning, who was an elite player for Old Dominion last year. They've been having some really impressive players come from that secondary the last couple of years. Of course, you had a few of them play for Indiana last year, who ended up making the CFP. He only allowed 59 yards in coverage, so Manning is a terrific addition. Kelly Jones is a redshirt freshman last year. Played very well at corner. He's going to remain in the lineup. D'Angelo Brumfield, also a returnee, was average in his 4 games. A pair of transfers are expected to help there. Javen Williams, who's really good for Kennesaw State. And then Dwight Lewis, who was two-time all-first team for Marion College at the MSFA level. They also got Amarian Jefferson from the JUCO ranks. So they dipped to the portal big time, Nick. A lot of these guys are very not notable in terms of the schools they played at, JUCO and lower level FCS schools. I don't know if that's really going to project well into the SEC, but I think Jerron Manning is going to be a clear standout.
Jerron Manning's a very good player that they add there that I think could be a really good plug-in from Old Dominion. Isaac Smith, your top returning tackler. Always love when you get your top tackler back. He was really good for them last year. 127 total tackles, 2 tackles for loss, 3 pass breakups. He's really solid, a forced fumble as well. I like what he can do. I think Smith will get 100 tackles again this year easily. Hunter Washington is a really good player to turn 55 total tackles, 2 tackles for loss, a pick for him, 2 pass breakups. Braylon Lanier as well, 53 total tackles, 2 tackles for loss, and a pick for him. Decent numbers there. I think Kelly Jones showed a lot as a true freshman, 29 total tackles and a pass breakup for him. Expect him to have an increased role this year and be solid in that left cornerback role. I think adding Dwight Lewis was not a bad either. Tyler Woodard could potentially step up. D'Angelo Brumfield as well is not a terrible player. The Manning ad obviously is a really good ad, right? This is a guy that's a very versatile player in your secondary that can do a lot for you. He was really good at Old Dominion last year, 85 total tackles, 5.5 tackles for loss, 3 picks, 3 pass breakups. He's a really good player that certainly had some great games, right? 14 total tackles against Texas State and 11 against App State. A really talented player that can certainly step up and be very effective for this defensive unit.
A few minutes ago, I said they had 12 portal ads on defense. That number is up to 17 now, so I just want to clear that up. Looking at the verdict, though, this defense will be a work in progress as they are hitting that aforementioned portal hard to try and beef up the weak areas. I think they improve behind a few quality players in the secondary, more power up front, and a pretty good linebacking group. This will still be a liability until they can find a pass rush, though, and better playmaking, especially from that secondary. So I got to give it a pretty low grade of a C, Nick. I think they will be better across the board, but when you rank towards the bottom of college football in all ranks, a slight improvement can still lead to a bad unit for the next season.
It only can go up from here. This was a terrible unit last year, 118th in points per game, 130th dead last against the run with 216.9 yards per game. Gave 456 yards per game, 126 in the nation. Just brutal numbers across the board. Give over 34 points per game. Got to find a way to cut that number down this year. This is a unit that will get better. Some of the ads were really strong. I think Jerron Manning was a phenomenal ad. Levy's clearly hitting the portal, trying to address needs. Still a very much a work in progress, so I cannot be very high on this defense, but I think they will certainly improve and they'll hold some of those tougher opponents, maybe at less points than they gave up last year. Definitely improvements coming in year 2 of Jeff Levy down in Starkville.
We'll get the final prediction in the schedule for Mississippi State. They should be one of those teams that shows more competitiveness in year 2 under a new young head coach. I think they certainly will behind an improved balanced offense. And a defense, they'll show more signs of life. And even last year, they were competitive, Nick, against 7-5 against the spread. It's a pretty good, bright spot because that shows that you weren't just getting domed against every opponent you played. Finding any wins on an unreal schedule, though, is a large task. I think they'll scare a few teams, though, and I think they'll start early on, week 2 against Arizona State. This is a game I contemplated picking them to win. I still might come game day. That's a team that was in the playoff last year. They return a lot on defense and a superstar quarterback. So it'll be a tough task, but it'll be certainly one that puts them on notice. And if that happens, they'll be 4-0 most likely, even though that big trap game comes week 1 against Southern Miss, a team that adds a significant amount of players of a new good head coach in Charles Huff. So, they just opened at 15-point favorites on the road. I think that might be a bit of a scary opportunity for them. This is a team I think can be good enough to win 5 or 6 games if they played a little bit easier of a schedule, Nick. But this is just unreal. I don't know who they'll beat. I think the home games are cool, though. Georgia, Texas, Tennessee. It's going to be a little tough. I think they'll have some competitive first halves. They might even take one of those teams deep into the fourth quarter. Ole Miss, another one. But wins here, man. Where do you find them?
Wins are tough to find on this schedule, and it sucks because this is a team that's got a great fan base. They show up with those cowbells. I had a lot of friends who went Mississippi State, and they are struggling to find those wins in conference play. And again, it's going to be another tough year for this team, and the schedule is not helping them. They play 4 teams that played in the college football playoff last year, and that's not including Ole Miss, who probably should have been in the playoffs, but Ole Miss blew it by losing Kentucky. That's still a very talented roster, and hey, maybe you want to circle that game as a potential upset. They covered the spread last year against Ole Miss. I think they'll certainly cover the spread against them this year, depending on what it is. That the Egg Bowl is a really freaky game sometimes. Maybe something could happen there in late November. Want to keep an eye on that as we sort of get further in the season, although I think the TV time was announced for that recently. It's kind of an awkward time. I think it's like 11 a.m. on a Friday. Not really too sure if I like that at all. I prefer when that game was on Thanksgiving. Not too sure why it was moved off Thanksgiving. Outside of that, when you look at the schedule, right, it's just brutal, right? These are some really good SEC teams, plus you're adding a non-conference against the Big 12 champions who were in the playoff last year. Not a pushover whatsoever. They play an easier MAC team this year. They lost to a MAC team at home last year. I don't think they're going to lose to Northern Illinois, but that's certainly potentially in the cards, and that would be really disappointing to fall them to 2-10 potentially, or maybe even 1-11 if they lose to Southern Miss. Just a brutal draw across the board. That Southern Miss game is quite fascinating. The 15.5 line, I think, is something you want to take a look at if you're a gambling man. That's a good team that's putting together something with some new coaching in Charles Huff, and that's a team. Those teams hate each other, right? When you look at the dynamics of the rivalry, a lot of those states that have big schools in the South, like Alabama, like Georgia, like Florida, they don't really have a rivalry with the smaller schools, but that's different in the state of Mississippi. Southern Miss absolutely hates Ole Miss and Mississippi State, and the two big SEC schools don't like Southern Miss. It's kind of funny. They're traveling to Hattiesburg to open the season on the road, but those two schools absolutely hate each other. Southern Miss is wanting to get any sort of punches it can get at Big Brother in the state, or one of its two big brothers in the state. They'll come out firing on all cylinders in Charles Huff's first game. Don't be surprised if Southern Miss keeps at a 7-point, 8-point game late down the stretch. Certainly a game to watch. A tough season for Jeff Lebby and co. I like what they're building, though, in Starkville. I think they can certainly put something together in the future. The offense has some key pieces. The defense has some decent pieces as well. Definitely a late wait-and-see approach. Hopefully they give Lebby a lot of time, and maybe he'll be able to put something together down in a great town in Starkville.
Last year I had the under on wins for Miss State. That cleared with ease. This year it's 3.5, and it's minus 145 on over 3.5. Nick, the books are feeling it somewhere, and I wouldn't have no play on this one because I certainly think they could start 4-0, but they can also start 2-2. In your easiest SEC games are at Arkansas and at Missouri, and those aren't going to be really all that easy. So this is one I would certainly stay away from because I definitely think this team can knock somebody off. And we've seen it plenty of times before, so I'd stay away from the total, Nick. I think this team will be better in their record that we're giving it. Final thoughts on the Bulldogs?
Yeah, certainly a team that will be better than their record indicates. I think they'll be good against the spread again this year. Certainly when you get into the depths of SEC play, I'm going to love to probably take them in some of those lofty underdog roles. They'll probably find a way to cover the spread against Texas, Georgia, and Ole Miss when push comes to shove. I feel bad for that fan base. Like I said, I keep saying it, but they're a great fan base. I've been to Starkville many times in my visits to SEC schools. Always a great fan base that puts a lot of passion into it. Hopefully in the future they'll contend. Right now, another tough season on the books, though.
Make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.